We've shown maps/graphics from time to time of the NATO Enhanced Forward Presence Units or Forward Land Forces, and people have picked up on the fact that the Icelandic flag appears even though Iceland itself lacks a military force. But yes, Iceland does contribute to these NATO multinational units in its own rather special way. And this is something we'll briefly take a look at for today's video. Iceland is a bit of an enigma when it comes to NATO membership and its contribution to the alliance. Without its own defense force, it certainly has its own different way of participating in the military alliance. But before we get into discussing this, we have to say that producing a video on this topic is a challenge. Iceland being an enigma, the country doesn't seem to produce multimedia content on its NATO activities. Either that, or we're just not looking in the right places on the internet. With this in mind, we may just end up showing you stock video of Iceland or footage of other NATO forces in the Baltics. But carrying on, what is Iceland's actual contribution to NATO forward land forces in the Baltics? It's a four-word answer: civilian strategic communications specialists.
I want to commend Iceland's contributions to NATO's deterrence and defense, not only on the northern flank, but also in the Baltic region, where you contribute experts to our forward land forces.
Without a military, Iceland doesn't have any military personnel to deploy. Thus, the Nordic nation sends civilians to participate in these multinational military units. But, well, from what we've seen thus far, Iceland sends a civilian, a single person, to each of the units in the Baltics. For Estonia, this was confirmed recently in a special feature article on ERR discussing Iceland's participation in NATO and the Baltic units. In this ERR article, Thorlindur Kjartansson is highlighted as Iceland's deployed communications specialist in Estonia. Kjartansson's current deployment to Estonia is said to be 2 years in duration, from 2024 to 2026. ERR is then quoted as saying, like his colleagues in Latvia and Lithuania, his job is to contribute to strategic communications, or stratcoms, and analysis of geopolitical developments. The ability to formulate and communicate your messages to a wider audience, both to your allies and adversaries, is critically important today, Kjartansson tells the Estonian public broadcaster. Speaking of Kjartansson's colleagues, we see from this NATO Multinational Brigade Latvia Facebook post that the strategic communications advisor in that Baltic country is, or was, a woman by the name of Brynja Friðriksdóttir. This post by the NATO Force Integration Unit in Latvia highlights that Iceland joined the team in Latvia in 2020. An Icelandic specialist in Latvia came after specialists had already been sent to the other two Baltic nations. A May 2017 post on Twitter/X announced at the time that Iceland would soon be contributing to NATO Enhanced Forward Presence with civilian experts in Lithuania and Estonia. Based on this article/news piece by the Lithuanian Armed Forces, it looks like the first strategic communications specialist from Iceland began work in the country in early 2018 as part of a 6-month deployment. We spoke to a public affairs representative for the NATO battle group in Lithuania in late August and were told that, at the moment, there is no Icelandic civilian specialist deployed from Iceland to this specific unit. Will that change in the future? We're not quite sure. That's really all there is to say, or at least all that we could find, about Iceland's involvement in the NATO multinational unit stationed in the Baltics, which again amounts to 2 or 3 civilians. But what else does Iceland contribute to the NATO alliance if it lacks its own defense force? Well, as explained by the strategic communications specialist based in Estonia, in a time of crisis, the area around Iceland controls access to the Atlantic from the north. This position, essentially, is Iceland's main contribution to NATO. ERR explains that this area is known as the Gígjuk or Gígjuk Gap, a maritime corridor between Greenland, Iceland, and the United Kingdom/Norway. With Iceland's geographical location, it is advantageous for NATO to establish facilities on the island, including the Iceland Air Defence System, or IADS, the Control and Reporting Centre, or CRC, Keflavik, and an air policing mission. It also hosts several military exercises, including Northern Viking and Dynamic Mongoose, the latter being NATO's biggest submarine exercise. And so, while Iceland's deployed contribution may be small, it does have its own special role in the alliance. At the same time, the strategic communications services provided by its specialists do hold importance, especially when information and disinformation has the ability to spread far and wide in a matter of seconds. This is precisely why we at Baltic Defence Review are seeking to work more closely with organisations like Civic Resilience Initiative, an entity which seeks to educate Northern, Central and Eastern Europeans about the presence of disinformation and how to detect it. If you're interested in learning more about this kind of work, check them out at cri.lt. That's it for today. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.